Hey gang, Brian here. If you're coming to this episode from a podcast called Bring Me the Axe, I'd like to assure you that you're in the right place. Dave and I decided that before we got too deep into this podcast business, we changed the name of the show to something a little more original. As it happens, there's like 6 podcasts called The Brothers Grimm. It's hard enough already to stand out amongst all the other horror podcasts. Why make it harder on ourselves by confusing ourselves with other shows? From now on, we're the Bring Me the Axe Horror Pod. And if you want to connect with us on other platforms, you can find us simply by Googling Bring Me the Axe Horror Podcasts. We're everywhere. And now, on with the show. You're listening to the Brothers Grimm podcast, presented by the Cinema Suicide Film Society on Substack. I'm Brian White, editor-in-chief of Cinema Suicide. I'm joined by my co-host and actual brother, Dave. Dave, how you doing?
Hey-o. I'm doing all right. It's the first warm day we've had in like 17 months, so I'm into that.
Yeah. We had a lot of rain, so this was nice. So we practically grew up in neighborhood video stores, and the steady diet of utter garbage that those shops provided us with continues unabated to this day. There's no one else I enjoy chopping it up with more about trashy movies than Dave. Just before we get into it, a little bit of housekeeping. If you want to keep up with us between episodes, you can also find us on Twitter and on Instagram at GrimmBrosPod. We've also got a sweet new website now at brothersgrimpodcast.show. That's .show.com takes you to another Brothers Grimm podcast. You can listen to all of our past shows there and read the transcripts because we're just that funny. You can also contact us directly at grimbrospod@gmail.com with any questions, comments, or suggestions. Do let us know if there's a movie that you love, would like to hear us give it the business. And lastly, if you like what you hear, you can subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You'd be doing us a favor by leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. So I just want to get that all out of the way right at the top of the show. So here it is. I'm going to give you a little taste of what we got coming up.
Did you ever have one of those nights?
Hey, where are we going? Doesn't matter. What counts is that you're my buddy.
My day didn't start off too well.
We be looking for ya.
Are we jumpy tonight?
And then it got worse.
We're here.
And then...
Gentlemen, I give you Katrina.
You're just what I'm looking for. Why'd you pick on us?
It was a mistake. It was a little error there, a little communication error. I'm sorry.
Uh-oh.
Let's just get out of here.
This is not really happening.
Hello, baby.
God, you look awful. What happened to you?
I was nearly hung. I got into a fight with a psychotic albino. I hit a cockroach, my best friend disappeared, and then I'm nearly assassinated by a runaway elevator. Anyone can have an off night. This is fantastic!
Vamp, a comedy with bite. And of course, Grace Jones.
And of course, Grace Jones. Yep, that's
You know
right.
what that movie is? That is The Breakfast Club in decrepit Los Angeles.
Yeah.
But also Grace Jones.
And also Grace Jones. Yeah, that's actually not a bad trailer. Like, for once, one of the ones that we run, it actually kind of represents it. It's one of those ones that it uses a lot of footage that's not actually in the movie. There's a couple of shots in there that just I would love to know what that is. Like, there's that one scene where it looks like Makepeace is falling out of like a garbage chute or something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah. But warning before we get rolling, we're going to talk about this movie from beginning to end, so spoilers to follow. But also, this kicks off our Pride series. It's June,
Right.
Pride 2023, and given the dire status of LGBTQ plus rights in the world, it's more important than ever to stand in solidarity, support everyone who's under attack right now. Let them know that they have a safe haven with us. It's also vital that we highlight queer artists, culture makers, as a reminder that the color that they provide the world with isn't born in a vacuum. And because I personally am gleefully antagonistic, I cherish every opportunity to stick my middle finger in the face of bigots everywhere. So just to let you know. So here we are, some facts. We're actually moving out of our usual sort of comfort zone. We've been in like 1980 to 82. This one is made in 1986. It was a hell of a year for horror movies. So some other movies released that year: From Beyond, Spookies, which I watched recently. That movie fucking sucks.
Yeah, it's a hard one.
It's terrible. I don't know if I even finished it. The Fly also came out this year. Awesome.
That is a great one.
That is a fantastic one.
And super gross.
Yep, super gross. You get the full Goldblum. Invaders from Mars, which I haven't seen since I think it came out. I should really go back and watch that one at some point. Also,
That's
Friday
Toby Hooper.
It's Hooper's. Yeah, it's one of the ones he did for Canon. I think right after that was the one he did, Life Force, the naked vampire one. Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives, and lastly, Night of the Creeps. I mean, just to name a few.
I love that movie.
I fucking love that movie. That movie was written specifically for Tom Atkins to just do what he does. It's so good. So, cast and crew on this picture. So this was directed by a guy named Richard Wenk. It's a very unfortunate last name. This was his first feature, and following this one, he did a few more movies before transitioning to a writer on pictures like The Expendables 2, and he did the 2 Equalizer movies, and 16 Blocks, which I think is a remake of the Clint Eastwood picture The Gauntlet. But he hasn't been terribly busy. Prior to this movie, he made a short film in 1979 called Dracula Bites the Big Apple, which is available on the Arrow Blu-ray. It's also on.
Let me tell you something. Did you watch that movie?
I did. It was extremely funny.
That is it is a fine piece of cinema. It is a very odd.
I didn't know what to expect, but what I was definitely not expecting was a musical.
Yeah. Yeah, it was pretty hilarious.
Yeah, it's very funny. It's 20 minutes. I'll link it in the show notes, and everybody should watch it. It's really funny, and it's like a real kind of like snapshot of New York in 1979. Like they go all over the place, to all the tourist spots, and they even end up at Studio 54. And like Steve Rubell is even in the movie himself, which is pretty funny, and it really plays up the whole 54 thing. With how
Steve Rubell looking as self-conscious as a person could ever act.
Oh, I know.
It would be like if you put me in that movie. I'd be like, I'm acting.
It's like the way he acts is almost like when somebody like a news crew shows up to somebody and they just stick a mic in somebody's face and he's like, oh, I guess we're doing this.
And he's on just piles of cocaine at the time,
God,
so
yeah.
it's really tough for him to keep it together.
Yep, but the cast is we got Chris Makepeace, who most people are going to remember from either Meatballs or My Bodyguard,
or alternatively, you might also remember him from Mazes and Monsters, the fantastic anti-Dungeons and Dragons movie starring Tom Hanks. It is hilarious, and you can find it on YouTube.
that's got to be on Tubi. Also, that's got Tubi written all over it. We've also got.
It's really good.
It's pretty good. We've also got Robert Rusler from the other wicked gay horror movie, A Nightmare on Elm Street 2.
Which I would argue is not a gay horror movie. It's actually quite homophobic.
I think we talked about this before, but I'm glad that it's been sort of reclaimed, and the sort of power has been sort of taken away from it. But that movie fucking ruined Mark Patton's life, and like it is super, super homophobic in a way that's like really gross. Because I remember, like, really it seemed like right around the time that like Halloween 3 kind of got its reappraisal. Like everybody was like, "Hey, what about Nightmare on Elm Street 2?" And right before that, like about a year prior, like I think you had watched it and you texted me and were like, "Have you seen this movie in a while?" And I was like, "I don't know, probably not." And you're like, "There's like a leather bar scene and a part where a dude gets his ass whipped."
It's not. You know what? I think we should all just skip it. If you want to know about it, watch the amazing documentary Scream Queen. Pretty sure it's still on Shudder. But the movie, those guys can go get fucked. They suck.
I know. I recently just saw. I cannot remember what outlet it was, but so that director Jack Shoulder, he also did.
He's a piece of shit.
Fuck that guy right in the face. He also did Wishmaster 2. Which I don't think I've even seen the first one. I don't care. But apparently, Wishmaster 2 also has the same sort of like gay panic themes. And that was made in like 1999, which kind of feels like it was at least past the turning point where like you could really sort of get away with that. Like that sort of thing really feels like it was right at home in the 80s, you know. It's so weird. I'm tempted to watch it, but I don't know if I care enough. Like, I don't give a shit. That guy can, suck it. But Robert Rusler, he's done a ton, and he's still working. Like a lot of these guys, he's in TV these days. Also, Gede Watanabe, who must have been thrilled to do this movie, because for once...
Is it Watanabe or Watanabe?
It's Watanabe is how you would pronounce it, yeah. I just have been saying it that way because I'm fucking lazy. But for once,
white people,
I know we're the worst. He's just some guy, and he's not Long Duck Dong, and he's not doing an accent, which he's basically like up all the way to 1990 was kind of his thing.
Yeah, he said that he was worried. He was worried he wouldn't be funny without the accent.
Oh, that's so sad, man. I feel for him.
And I say, Gede, don't you worry. You're a fucking star.
He is one of two very good reasons to watch this movie. We are probably going to talk about him a lot because he's like my favorite character in the whole thing.
I know this guy. He has built a perfectly respectable career for himself ever since then. But he is just fantastic in this movie.
He's great, and like I didn't know this. Like I kind of lost track of him, and like really, and I admit it has a lot to do with just the way that he was portrayed. Like I kind of stopped seeing him in movies, and it's mostly because he moved over to television. But he was on ER for like 7 years.
Yeah, that's like 8 years.
Yeah. But like, yeah, like he's just a regular dude in this movie, and it's great because like he had to do that Asian guy shticks like straight up to like at least 1990. Because I just watched Gremlins 2 recently, and he's in that, and he hardly has any lines because he's too busy being Asian guy with a lot of cameras. Yeah. Joe Dante, you're letting me down.
Come on.
But also, and of course, like this is one of the reasons that like that this movie is even really kind of like kept up in the sort of collective memory, and that's because Grace Jones is in this movie as the sort of big bad villain. She plays a vampire named Katrina, and she is the draw. She's awesome because this is honestly.
If you don't know who Grace Jones is, turn this off right now.
Oh yeah, go look her up. So she was like. So this is honestly, this movie is really kind of like a mid-level horror comedy, and it's not a red hot nostalgia item for some pretty good reasons. But if there's one reason to watch this, and I'm going to hit that nail a lot, it's Grace fucking Jones. So she was basically, in a nutshell, a model, but way, way, way more.
Oh no, that undersells it.
That undersells it hardcore because like.
She is a performer, is what she is.
Really, like she's probably the character who is at the dawn, not really of the supermodel thing, but really of the model as a kind of cultural export. She was also a singer. This
still is.
Yep, she's still performing. If she ever comes around, man, I will go and see her in a second. She was real like a central figure in the New York art and fashion world. She was like a regular of around Andy Warhol, and anybody who took like was like an art photographer has shot her. You know, she and like it's if you're listening to this, you fucking know who Grace Jones is. She cuts a very sincere profile. Like she's like a living Patrick Nagel painting. It's really
she is probably one of the most fascinating, captivating looking people I've ever seen.
Yeah. Like, and I mean, that's really one of the reasons why they cast her is the character that she's playing was written without lines. And I listened to the director commentary, and the reason that he did it was because every time he tried to write lines for this character, he would read them back and be just embarrassed by them. So his whole thing was, fine, this character is really more like an animal than a person. So in order to carry a role like that, you need somebody who's got fucking presence. Originally, it was supposed to be Tina Turner because like this was that whole Private Dancer era, and she was really, really big, and she was getting into...
She's too classy for it, though.
Also, it wouldn't have landed the same. Like she was a very, very interesting person in her own right. And like this was right around that time she's trying to get into movies. Like she had just done Mad Max. She had a shitload of hits. Like this was like really on the upswing of her comeback, but like she just would not have carried the movie the same way. Bianca Jagger was also supposed to be was their next pick, and then when that
Speaking of Studio 54,
right? Like this gets Studio 54 all over it. But yeah, she's a real Renaissance woman. Just this was her third role. She had already done Conan the Destroyer. She was Mayday in that sort of notorious low point for the Bond franchise, A View to a Kill. And so this is where this was like her, like really like her third acting role. And like, she still shows up here and there in stuff. So yeah. So let's get around to some notes here. So this was like, this was released by New World Pictures. So it was like a really kind of I guess they're technically an independent production company. It was a poster before it was a movie. And that's kind of the way that a lot of these outfits do this, where like a producer will come up with an idea. It's really how it works in Europe a lot, particularly in the 70s in Italy, where like somebody will say, I want a movie that has Mad Max cars and people fighting with swords and like this, and then they'll make a poster and they'll go sell it, and then they'll write the script. So this is kind of like that, where
and the film is called The Scorpion Fish Kills at Night.
Yeah, 13 times. It's got to have a number,
Yes.
It's got to have an animal, and it's got to be really wobbly when translated into English. So yeah, New World Pictures. This was a company that used to be Corman, a Corman joint, but he basically sold the whole thing in 1983. One of the things that I found in an interview with Donald Borcher, I think he's the producer on this movie,
he used to work with Corman.
So he was there at New World, I think from like somewhere in the mid 70s. And so when Corman sold his interest in the company to whoever bought it, he basically sold them the movies and like all of the sort of like IP, but he took all of the company's assets with him, so that when he left, he took like desks and chairs and phones and stuff. So like the people who were left over were literally left with like empty offices. I think that's a very funny thing about the guy, because he probably just turned around and sold it all at a yard sale. But yeah, they only had a very vague idea of what this movie was going to be about when they got to Wenk. And they got to him because of that Dracula short that he made. They were like, here's a guy who made a vampire movie.
Yeah, I don't think I understand that connection, because it's like that. Well, you call it a vampire movie if you want to be charitable, but that would, like, if there were no other vampire movies ever made, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Like, if this was the first time anyone had ever seen, like, since Bela Lugosi's Dracula, this is the first time anyone's ever. Okay, then I get it. Otherwise, what the fuck?
I know. I get the feeling that it's a little bit of that like that Hollywood logic where it's nobody's really thinking. They just connect like dots. It's like word association. Like they probably saw the short somewhere and were like, oh, well, we have a movie that's going to have vampires in it. And here's a guy who made a movie with a vampire in it. So we'll get him and he'll be fine. Because he'd never done anything before. This was his first feature.
Yeah, I mean, more likely they were like, we need someone who's going to work for real cheap.
Yeah, it was made for $2 million.
And who knows what a vampire is.
Yeah. So yeah, the idea, when he got to it, the whole idea was they wanted a movie that involved frat boys, strippers, and vampires. And he wrote the movie in a weekend.
Well, I can tell.
Kind of shows. There's some gaps in this movie that drive me crazy. Also, supposedly the chair from Katrina's scene where she does her like striptease thing is supposedly molded from the body of Dolph Lundgren, who was her boyfriend at the time. Yeah. So, yes.
What a fucking wild couple.
I know.
Neither of them speak very good English.
Yeah, she's dated a lot of really unusual people. So the movie opens on dramatic music. There's a group of robed men drag two struggling men into what appears to be a church. And
this is some legit Omen music.
Oh yeah. It's like very baroque and ominous. And at its top, they're fitted with nooses. And these men are Chris Makepeace, who plays Keith, and Robert Rusler, who plays his buddy AJ. And it looks like it's some sort of ritual or like a an execution, but it's just a frat initiation that goes wrong. There's like a booming voice that's sort of giving a narration and sort of like telling what's going to happen. But then it turns out that it's just a guy mouthing the words that's playing from like a boombox that's currently eating the tape. That's Christopher Plummer's voice, by the way.
What is it from?
He came over and just like recorded it because he was like in a hotel that the director was staying at.
Because I'll tell you what, Christopher Plummer does not strike me as the kind of guy who has a great sense of humor.
Really? Well, he played a Klingon once, so maybe he's into that sort of thing. But yeah, or either that or he was like, $1,000 right now, and he gave it to him cash or something. But this scene kind of flips the script on the whole frat comedy thing, where usually the pledges are desperately trying to get into the frat. And these two act like they couldn't give a shit.
But I'll tell you what, as college pranks go, this one is right up there with the school shooting in everyone's favorite movie, apparently, Final Exam.
Because they're gonna hang him.
Yeah, it's like, Jesus Christ.
I don't know. There's a lot of in like Skull and Bones and like others. I mean, I'm pretty sure that like your average like Greek house isn't doing something quite this elaborate, but like some of the ones that are like really old and at like Ivy Leagues involve a lot of death imagery. Like Skull and Bones involves actual skulls and bones and coffins and shit.
I don't know anything about fraternities. I went to the liberal arts college, but this shit just looks ridiculous and it seems really dangerous.
Yeah. But it is weird because like by this point, like most frats were just doing stuff like what we saw in Final Exam, where it's just like, torturing people and like a lot of shaving cream and nakedness and stuff. So like this strikes like a very particular like Ivy League chord. But yeah, they AJ and Keith want in on the frat, but they want to sort of do it on their terms. And this is where we sort of establish that like they go back a ways, they've got chemistry, and they really do. I feel like these two, I buy them as like old friends. They really jive pretty well. But AJ,
I will come back to that a little bit later because it's important for why it's one of the reasons I chose this movie.
Yeah. I think I know what you're talking about. But AJ is sort of like a wheel and deal businessman.
Yeah, he's a classic 80s trope. He's that
right.
Guy. What do you want? What do you need? I got it for you. I'll get it for you, baby.
Yeah, like he could like turn up his collar, like that's really kind of the thing. And so he says that instead of doing this stupid initiation, that he will provide them with party favors for this party they're having like tonight. Instead of the usual pledge nonsense, that means getting them a stripper for the party.
Yeah, referring to women as party favors is super gross.
Yeah, that's my word. Unfortunately, I can't remember what.
It's the same idea. I mean,
that's really what I was pulling it from there. But this was also like this was 1986, so it's the peak yuppie years, like really right before it sort of like tips.
Yeah, this is Blair in Pretty in Pink.
Yep. So, and this is the thing, is it makes it really hard for me to really like either of them because I find them both...
especially Chris Makepeace's character, and Chris Makepeace is not a particularly magnetic character or actor, I'm sorry to say.
But maybe it's just because of like Meatballs. Like I every time I see him, all I think of is Rudy the Rabbit. And like in that movie, he's the underdog, but he's also like 12. And
you should see him in Mazes and Monsters. Fucking classic.
Because that was before Meatballs, I think, or maybe it was after.
I think it might be a little bit after, but
yeah. But so we cut to their dorm room, and it's very typical of college comedies. The whole thing is cluttered, and there's like shit all over the walls, and Keith plays...
Including a, what you might call Chekhov's bow and arrow.
I was about to just say Chekhov's bow and arrow.
Because the first time I saw it, I was like, first of all, why is he using it indoors? Second of all, why is it just hanging on the wall?
It is a super awkward placement. Like, it's the most obvious thing. Like, I remember
this is like some Rambo bow and arrow shit.
Yeah, like it's not just like a gimmick one or anything. Like, it's a serious like compound bow. Like, and he's got a huge like target on the wall behind him. So it's like, is he shooting arrows into that wall? Like, what exactly is this thing doing in his room? Apart from just sort of establishing the fact that he knows how to use this. It's about the most like awkward placement of like a Chekhov's X ever. So immediately, like, I hadn't seen this movie in a really, really long time. Like, I think the last time I'd seen it was like 1989 or something. And so I had completely forgotten most of the plot points. But as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh, he's going to kill vampires with that. AJ is calling up friends of his on a full-size payphone that is not on a wall or anything. He's like carrying it around with him. And it sounds like he's just calling women that he knows who are like either dancers or maybe they're just women, and he's trying to convince them to be straight.
It's just how you talk to ladies in 1986. You just assume they'll all dance nude for money.
It is really appropriate in 1986. I mean, this was like right when like Andrew Dice Clay was coming up.
Speaking of shitty people.
Oh, good God. I know. But they want out of this dorm because apparently the whole dorm hall is like a shit show. And like at one point, to sort of like illustrate this, AJ like opens up the door and it's just mayhem out in the hall, where there's like a guy being carried, like tied to a stick, and like somebody's like firing
Yeah, it's like Apocalypse Now in the hall.
It really is. And like, I don't know about you, I'd probably be okay like living in a place that's just madness all the time. But yeah, they want into this frat house because it's like a frat house and it's not this crazy ass dorm.
And because they have cable television.
Oh, that's right. Yep.
But nothing to sneeze at.
Nope. Especially not then. Like, I think, Jesus Christ, that was about the year that we actually got cable for the first time, like when our family did. So that's a big deal. It's a big deal. HBO, Cinemax. All right. So they decide that they're going to drive into the city to find a professional.
Now, do they ever say where they are?
No, it's actually, this was shot at USC, but they're
in Los Angeles. The whole thing is in Los Angeles, but I don't think they ever actually say it.
No. And the city itself, like the skyline is recognizable in that sense, because like this was around the time where they stopped sort of using New York as the shorthand for like urban decay and started just doing like Los Angeles. And so LA, because of its sort of exotic nature, was that. So you just knew it. But like they don't actually say they're going to LA, you just kind of assume it. Or I think they do actually say you're in downtown LA. But I don't know. It's beside the point. They don't say where they're at. But to get into the city, they need a car. And to get a car, they have to talk to Duncan. And so we cut to Duncan's dorm room, and he's in there. And this is like the exact opposite of AJ and Keith's dorm room. It's like a spacious. It looks like the library at a palatial estate in like New England somewhere. Like it's humongous. It's full of people who it turns out Duncan has paid to be there for one reason.
Yeah, this is some real back to school shit.
It really is. When we're introduced to him, this is Getty Watanabe, by the way. He is shown to be like hitting golf balls into a net as a guy stands next to it, sort of laconically announcing like how awesome the swing was. And it turns out there's like a bank of dudes off to the side on computers, like writing all of his class papers for him. And then they all get up and they leave, and he's sort of like in a hurry. He's like trying to get him to stay and hang out and like be buddies and stuff. So like what we're learning about Duncan is he doesn't have a lot of friends, and the way that he's written is he's supposed to be like a spoiled rich kid, but the way that Getty plays him is not that way, and the joke doesn't really ever land. In fact, AJ and Keith kind of make a big deal out of like their deal to get a car out of him is instead of paying him, they'll like be his friend for a week, or they'll pretend to be his friend for a week, which sucks. he doesn't really strike me as a bad guy, and the perks of hanging out with him seem pretty good since he seems to have a bottomless bank account. He's got a wallet full of cash and credit cards. He presents them with a tray of bagels to eat and crudité.
I mean, who doesn't like bagels?
Or crudité.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'd hang out with him. He seems weird as hell.
He seems, that's it. He's more awkward than annoying. And like, I know plenty of people who are awkward. I would hang out with him in a heartbeat because he's probably picking up the tab everywhere he goes. But they need him for the car, and it turns out that he like rents his cars out because he's got several of them. As a matter of fact,
he has 10 of them.
Yeah, or 9 of them because the license plate says 1 of 9. But yeah, so they cut this deal where like they'll pretend to be his friend for a week if they can use the car, and he goes along with them. Hi, Brian here. Real quick, that howling sound you hear in the background for like the next few seconds, that's my cat Dexter. He does that at night, and this is when they start to drive into the city. So we cut to the car ride down, and they appear to be in like the wilderness, like on a dusty dirt road. Like you see the city off in the distance, but it's just hills. It's the hills outside of Los Angeles, basically, but. It's really weird in the way that that they go into town because like you don't see them leave.
Say where they're going because
we don't know where they're coming from.
Making of documentary,
and so the city may as well sort of like.
And like the director of photography really like the fact that this is in Los Angeles is like super important to him, and yet nobody else seems to give a shit about it, and they never really talk about it. So the fact that like this movie could have been shot anywhere is really weird when you consider how important it is to him in sort of his imaginary of this film.
Right. It sort of sounds like he has an idea. Almost like he has his own idea of what this movie is about, and the location is very important.
And I don't think he's wrong. I just don't think that anyone else gave a shit about that.
Right. It just needed to be urban. Right.
Yeah.
So, like along the way, like Duncan's in the back seat, and he's basically flipping through the back pages of some like free newspaper while AJ and Keith like sing that Robert Palmer song Bad Case of Loving You, but like they don't quite know it. It's essentially just them building rapport. Like these guys are tight, tight bros.
Yeah, they couldn't afford the song. They could afford the rights to perform the song, which is a very different thing than actually getting the license for the song.
Yeah. But Duncan finds an ad for a strip club called the After Dark Club, which was supposed to be called the After Hours Club, but they couldn't clear the title After Hours because that's the Martin Scorsese movie.
Yep.
So it's called the After Dark Club. They roll into downtown LA and immediately enter into the longest car spin out in the entire history of film.
Now I'm going to stop you right now because here begins one of the reasons why I chose this movie.
Okay.
There is nothing explicitly queer about this movie aside from Grace Jones, but
right, it's got connections, but nothing about the story or the characters is directly gay.
Yeah, there is, however, a kind of vibe to it. There is an aesthetic and this sort of like I don't know. It's like an edginess that I think you find more commonly like in John Waters movies. You'll find it in that kind of new queer cinema in the 90s, like Gregor Rocky. Stuff like that, where it's like they're using there's a lot of fantasy elements because this movie has a shitload of like it feels like a fantasy film in a lot of different places, and it has this kind of almost like a Wizard of Oz like vibe to it, where this car spins a million times and then all of a sudden you're in this other magical place that is for some reason, well I know the reason, but it is pink and green. Everything is this hard lighting. Okay, so that DP that you mentioned. So, this was basically his first like feature. Also, this was a first for a lot of people. Like Didi Pfeiffer. He's like a big time dude now.
Yeah, like he works with Steven Soderbergh. He works on movies that like everybody has seen at this point. Like, and he's a like a well known like a very respected guy. So. The reason that the color palette was chosen this way, and probably the reason that he was so enthusiastic about the location, was because a lot of what he was doing here, he was patterning after the movie After Hours, which have you ever seen it?
I have seen it, but it was a very long time ago.
So I watched it just recently because it came. I think Criterion was putting it out, so I watched it because I realized like I don't think that up to that point I don't think I'd ever seen it, and I had heard that it was Scorsese's like comedy because he's not a comedy guy, right? And so I was like, well, let's
talking about that monologue in Taxi Driver is hilarious.
Absolutely hilarious. I know. What am I thinking? But I watched that movie. And, oh, no, it was because there is an episode of Ted Lasso recently in the second season that is also based on it. And so I was like, I've got to see what this is all about. So I watched it. And first of all, maybe it's just me. I don't think it's very funny. I do, however, consider it a horror movie from front to back. Because it takes Griffin Dunn, and he was a thoroughly unlikable character. He's just a fucking dick. And he's also like a yuppie, and it dumps him into this like really otherworldly part of the city. So in the movie, he's from uptown Manhattan, which is like may as well be worlds away from lower Manhattan. Like it's an entirely different environment. And so it deposits him and sort of keeps him stuck in, I think, the East Village for most of the movie. I might be wrong about that, but it's definitely down in lower Manhattan. And it is a world away from the world that he knows. It's full of fucked up locations and weird people, and he's completely out of his element, which is exactly what this movie kind of is. And maybe what I can't remember what the director of photography's name is, but like maybe the reason that the location is so important to him is because in his head, this was his like riff on After Hours, because it very much is the same thing where it's these two kind of yuppie kids who get stuck in downtown Los Angeles, which I was just recently there, and like downtown LA may as well be another planet. Like compared to the rest of the surrounding areas, it is worlds away from Hollywood, which itself is a fucking nightmare. But it's nothing like it's the place in Los Angeles County where like after World War II, everybody fled from and moved out to like Glendale and Burbank and Pasadena, which are now like very posh and very expensive places to live, while downtown LA is like Thunderdome. It's crazy. It's crazy.
Well, so I think that's significant in this context because, you know, I think a lot of people have probably forgotten, maybe not, I don't know, that this was at a time when, you know, in the 80s and before that especially, it's a time when queer people, gay men in particular, are still kind of ghettoized with other minorities. So when you have this rundown part of town, where just, you know, this is where you'll find big Mexican populations, big black populations. It's also typically where you would find big gay populations. You would find a lot of like the freaks, the drag queens, the trans people. This is where everyone is sort of shuttled.
Oh, sure. Yeah. It's like the Castro or the Tenderloin or, you know, now like nowadays it's all kind of in West Hollywood. But yeah, I know what you're talking about.
And so this is that, it has that vibe of like, it's a fantasy and it's a hard transition. This car spin is a hard transition into you are now in a very different world in which you don't belong.
Right.
But everybody else does belong. You're on their turf now.
Right. Because like what we see, like everybody who inhabits this part of the city, and the way that like that transition you were talking about, it very much is like the tornado in The Wizard of Oz. And that's not the last Wizard of Oz reference we're going to get.
No, this is chock full of weird kind of queer fantasy elements.
Yeah. So like right after that, Makepeace says, like, I think we're not in Kansas anymore, something like that. But like the people who inhabit this part of the city are like, strippers, they're homeless people. There's a lot of like blue collar workers that also happen to be vampires. And the metaphor there, since they're all vampires and they're also very much othered, is that these are not romantic Anne Rice vampires. These are predatory creatures, and they're represented by people who yuppies that fled LA are trying to run from.
This also has a lot of like, you can feel that influence of like the Warriors and Streets of Fire.
Yeah.
Which are themselves very theatrical. Like, I mean, theatrical in like the sort of theater sense, the dramatic sense. Like, those are big theatrical performances. You can feel that in this. They don't execute it the same way, but it's there. That influence is also there.
Oh, right. Yeah. And also, it's funny that you mentioned that, because while I was listening to the commentary, when the second time that the albino gang shows up, when they sort of emerge from the steam in that car, the director actually says, like, this is our big Walter Hill moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you can feel like there's that scene in the Warriors when the Turnbull ACs come, like they're coming down the street on the bus. It's the same scene.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Except it's way cooler in the Warriors.
Oh, the
Warriors is just a cooler movie.
Ooh, perfect. 5 stars, no notes. But anyways, yeah. So now they're in the city, but they have the spin out, and also, like, maybe this is because I had a note where it was just like all of a sudden it's night. We go from broad daylight to night. They're on a very crowded city block at one point, and now they're in this like barren part of the city where nobody's out. But it's also like the middle of the night, which I think
this is a hard cut to you are no longer in a safe place.
Yeah, so that's I think that's really where I was kind of puzzled. Now, contextualizing it this way, it makes way more sense. There's the passage of time is really kind of irrelevant. We have just cut to a different place. So they take a minute to we cut to a diner, which is at closing time, and Duncan is in the restroom, and the owner is getting ready to hit the streets by donning a priest's collar and a
giant goofy cross,
gigantic crucifix on like a really long chain. But just as he's about to close, several spooky individuals led by B-movie legend Billy Drago enter.
Billy Drago looking like shit at any age. This guy is the weirdest looking motherfucker.
You know what it is maybe, I don't know if he ever intended it, or maybe he looked at himself in a mirror and was like, okay, if I'm going to go to Hollywood, I'm going to play villains. Because when I think of him, like the only time that I can think where he's like put together and he doesn't look like a fucking weirdo is in The Untouchables, because he played Frank Needy in that one. And in that one, he's like dressed up like a Chicago mobster. But like any other time I've seen him, it's that.
Yeah, otherwise, it's like, do you need a sorcerer? I've got your guy.
It's like that crazy hair. He's always very pale. He's got a look. So if you've ever spent any time whatsoever wading through like low budget cheapos, you've seen these guys. He's a very intense presence and a look of his own. He's definitely among those, oh, I know that guy, like character actors. Nowadays, I guess he's like an acting coach, and he still shows up here and there and stuff, usually playing villainous roles. I think the last time I ever really noticed him in anything, he was in a Michael Jackson video. One of those, like, it was like a sequel to his bad Smooth Criminal video. So
the real good era.
Dangerous, maybe, like, yeah, right before like everything went to hell for Michael Jackson, the second time, or third time, yeah.
It was a hard road.
Oh my god! But so it turns out that they're in some kind of a gang. It's him and it's 2 women. He shows up and he asks for 2 coffees and 6 cups, which is a reference that keeps getting brought up.
It's a heavy-handed way of saying there are more of
There's
them.
more of us, is it? This goes back to when we did the Sentinel, and I had weird memories of how I thought this movie went. So when I first saw this, I at some point got mixed up with another movie. I seem to remember his gang being like a gang of vampire hunters, but that's not the case at all. They're just this DTLA gang of
because it's really unclear if they're actually vampires, and that will come up later.
Right, because they come in, and I think that, your expectation is you're going to get vampires, because the movie's called fucking Vamp. And so they come in, and they're weird looking, and like one of the women is like flirting with Keith. She keeps like smiling at him and winking at him, and he's doing it back, and then she smiles at him and has this like mouthful of like fucked up teeth that causes him to do like
real gnarly,
like a spit take. But it's a really janky like mouth appliance that looks like it's gonna fall out of her mouth if she like opens it too wide or something. This sets off Drago's character's name, I think that either his character's name is Snowflake, or they just call him that because he's white hair, white skin, like he's got kind of the red eyes and like all that stuff. So he's supposed to be like an albino. And he comes over to sort of be menacing, and they start to kind of threaten the two guys. Duncan comes out in the middle of all of this, and he sees what's going on, and he pretends that he's like the plumber. And so he kind of like shrinks back into the men's room while this is all happening. But it turns out that AJ is good enough to handle the whole situation. And like he single-handedly manages to sort of not so much chase them off, but he grabs Snowflake by the balls and kind of pins him up against the wall. And there's a lot of crotch shots in this scene. Like they're constantly going from like the super tight shot of like the two guys in the face, and then like down to Robert Rusler's hand on this guy's nuts.
Well, a very loud Volare plays in the background.
Volare plays, yep, which is a song we're going to hear a couple of times. But it's enough to sort of like get them out of the place and kind of move them on. From here, we arrive at the After Dark Club, which is the place. And Duncan's very excited to go in, but the plan is not that all three of them go in. AJ is just supposed to go in, pick one of these women, and like hire her to come back with them, essentially. But Duncan is very excited, and so he what is the song that he sings? I'm in the mood for love. Something like that. I can't remember what it is. It ends up drawing him, Duncan, and Keith into the place behind it. AJ doesn't immediately realize that they're all there,
and Keith, it should be said that Keith, from the very beginning of this movie, seems put out by this whole thing. It's like he doesn't want to be there. He doesn't want to go. He doesn't want to have to go in. He's not even interested in, like, he doesn't want to go to the party. He doesn't want to be in the frat. The whole thing, he hates the whole fucking thing. He's just kind of going along for the ride.
He should have followed his instincts, because, like, this...
Stick a pin in that, because we're coming back.
Yep. So what it turns out is the club has... This is how they get a sort of a... We as viewers get a look at the machinery of this club and the way that the vampires inside operate. So... because AJ goes in by himself, he's received as a single man. And it turns out that this place has a single men's special, which is like way too good to be true. All you can drink for $1. And really what it is it takes these kind of like dregs of society, these people who just kind of wander into the place with no money on their own. It singles them out and they become food for the vampires. So that's what's at work here. AJ and Duncan, or Keith and Duncan going in afterwards, separates them and creates a complication.
And they're greeted by Vic at the door.
Vic, yep. So
Vic, I only know Vic from Leprechaun 2.
I probably so. So this is the club's like manager, his guy. A guy named Vic. He's played by a guy named Sandy Barron, who I don't know if I've ever seen him in anything. I didn't.
That's because you haven't seen Leprechaun 2.
I have not seen Leprechaun 2. But I'm sure he seems like a guy who was like a character actor in a lot of stuff. And he's great in this. So in that, and I'll link, I've mentioned it, I'll link to it in the show notes, but there was an interview I found on YouTube with Borcher about this. And there's a lot of really weird stories that he tells in it, and I'm not sure how many of them I can trust, because some of the stories that he tells are fucking strange. But apparently this role was written for Jerry Lewis originally, which I would have loved to have seen. I would have loved to have seen that. But the
Jerry Lewis is fucking human garbage.
But he would have been great.
I'm taking a hard stance on that one.
Oh no, I'm not fighting you. I just think he would have been great in the role. But this guy, Sandy Barron, he's really great. This is a strip club, but for a strip club, not a lot of stripping going on.
No, it is a very sad place.
Yeah, I mean that's supposed to be the point. Like it's
and the lady, I love the sexy construction lady on the stage stripping in a tool belt and a hard hat.
And the whole thing, the only part of her wardrobe that comes off is the tool belt. Like she leaves the stage wearing what we first see her in, and that's kind of how it goes for a lot of these women.
The performances, the dancing performances in this movie are hilarious.
Very obviously, there was no choreographer involved.
No.
Not like I said, not a lot of stripping going on. So, but there's a lot of there's a lot of music. There's a lot of songs that like you're probably not going to recognize because even by the standards of the time, these were kind of.
Well, maybe you won't recognize them, but I do.
Oh, but so did I. But like we're fucking weirdos, and we worked in a record store for like 10 years, so like we're definitely clued in on it. But
I'm also particularly fond of that era in Los Angeles rock music.
Oh, I know. So this is kind of a high point for soundtracks over scores. Like we've talked about music in these episodes before, but we're usually talking about like composers who are scoring a movie, a single person who composes all the music. And there's definitely a little bit of that in this, just like interstitial stuff to kind of underscore certain scenes when it needs like a little bit of that. But whenever we're in the club, there's licensed music playing. And this was really kind of, I'm not sure what the turning point was. It definitely wasn't this movie in particular, but like this is from this point on, you start to see a lot.
No, there's a John Hughesiness thing.
That's right. Okay.
That's where it all really comes from.
Yeah, right. Because like this is definitely like they were selling those records as like compilations, like various artist compilations, and they were selling very well. So
because throughout the 70s and even into the early 80s, movies, like going out to the movies, that's still like adult stuff. Like you still go out for a night on the town or whatever.
Oh,
it's
sure.
not until the 80s that you get like movies are for kids now.
Right.
Teenagers.
And they definitely did this into the 90s with some of the more like next generation formats of video. Like when DVD first came out, I remember like you'd go into like a store, like you go to Suncoast or you go to a record store that's also sold videotapes. They have a very, very small amount of like number of DVDs for sale. And it was always very adult fare. It was certainly not what it is now. But the notion for a really long time was that kids don't spend money. But then the 80s kind of changed that, where kids all of a sudden had like disposable income of their own and like significant quantities to go and like buy music. And like this was way back in the day when like I think even cassettes were kind of expensive. Like records were like a $20 affair in like 80s money. So but yeah, like this movie's got a ton of music in it. It's got tracks by like Dream Syndicate. It's got one by Dream 6, which was the original name for Concrete Blonde, who that like I think at the time that they came onto this, they were their previous self. But yeah, it's really sort of a specimen of that. Music's not bad. Not a ton of real hits on it, but there's a couple of really good tracks on it. A year later, Dokken hits with Dream Warriors for Nightmare on Elm Street 3, and that's
hell of a jam.
Oh my god, yeah. But that's when horror movies, because it seems like horror movies,
and that was always a cool cassette because it was yellow, I think.
Yeah, so like after that, like the Lost Boys also did it. They had a big like soundtrack album. Nightmare on Elm Street 3 did. Shocker did.
And if anyone's wondering, is that Lost Boys soundtrack good? The answer is no.
I think I remember a couple of songs from it that I really like way more than others. There's like an INXS track on it that I like a lot. But I don't know. We're not talking about that movie.
And we never will.
What?
I don't like that movie. Go on.
Oh my God.
I've derailed this, and I'm going to do it a million other times.
I fucking love Lost Boys. What the hell's wrong with you? Oh, all right. So we're back in the club, and enter Amaretto, not her real name. This is Dee Dee Pfeiffer's character.
More popularly known as Michelle Pfeiffer's sister.
Michelle Pfeiffer's sister. She's
I will say, next to Getty Watanabe, she is another one who, again, she has worked consistently. She has had a fine career. Everything is fine. She should have been a bigger star.
Yeah, because she's pretty good in this movie. I like her character a lot. I like her character way more than the frat boys. You know, like this is...
She's very likable. She's very cute. She brings something to this movie that was desperately needed.
Yeah. So this was her. This was her first role in a feature. So she was really going for it. Like to listen to her on that commentary track, she put a lot of thought, probably a lot more thought into this character than it really deserved. But what we got is way better than most of the movies. So, you know, that's great. So the alternative pick for her role was Pamela Springsteen.
Interesting choice.
Yeah, Bruce Springsteen's sister. But she ended up...
Who would go on to play?
Yeah, which I'm going to say. Yeah, so she instead of this, she's in Sleepaway Camp 2.
And 3.
And 3. You're right. So there's a bit of banter between her. So the whole thing is she sees Keith from across the bar and enthusiastically greets him as though as though they know one another. And this is sort of a running, I hesitate to say joke.
Yeah, this shit goes on too long.
Way too long, and it does not pay off in any meaningful way. It's kind of like in Kill Bill, where if we find out that the bride's name is Kiddo or something, or like that's her last name, and that's why Bill has been calling her that the whole time, and it comes out with that da 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 like music, and everybody I know is like, oh my god, that's amazing, and I'm left
and in your head you're like, oh fuck you.
Yeah, I'm like, what?
Get out of here.
Get the fuck out of here. Yeah. So
what I like about her character though is that these are supposed to be college kids, like young. They're living in a dorm. So
yeah.
These are early college kids. They do not read that way at all.
No,
she actually does read like she is 18, 19 years old because she has this kind of youthful, not dumb.
She's bubbly,
like, very naive bubbliness. That's very like she is hyper fixated on this guy who she kind of likes and kind of remembers.
Yeah.
But she's being really coy and playful, and she sells the shit on it.
Right, because AJ and Keith, they could also, they're supposed to be like 19, maybe 20 at the oldest, but they read like day traders or something. Like, yeah. There's a bit of banter, and again, there's a plot device set up that it just doesn't land. It doesn't land. We'll get there, but the whole thing is, what her real name is the going thing. So Keith is supposed to know it, and she eventually kind of becomes pissed off that he doesn't. But now comes the big scene. So now Vic announces Katrina, who is like the reason that if you're going to go to this seedy strip club, you're going to go there to see her. And this is enter Grace fucking Jones.
Yes, enter Dame Grace Jones as a goddamn weirdo.
Yep. Not erotic, not sexy.
No, my note actually says this is like anti-sexual.
It is, because like at least the others they're doing an imitation of striptease. You know, it's very chaste. Nobody's really taking their clothes off or anything like that. But it's still in a mode that's recognizable as like strip club. This is
wildly captivating to watch her do this. It is not sexual at all.
It's performance art. It's all I can think.
And you should probably describe what she looks like.
Okay.
If for those who have not seen it.
So the lights come up on the stage, and she is at the feet of this like chair. And that's the only way that I can really describe it. Is it's a chair molded in the form of a body.
Dolph Lundgren's
body, maybe. I don't know. That's a weird story, but
like all good chairs.
And she is wearing this like neck to feet, like red gown, but like you can kind of see below it. And she has this shocking like fire engine red wig on, and her face is painted completely white, like white, and she's got. This
was the cover of the VHS, and this is why I remembered this movie so well for so long, because it is a strange cover, and it is super memorable for no other reason than it is just her face in this chalk white makeup.
Yep. Even if you have not seen this movie, you remember the cover of the VHS or the DVD. It's still kind of a niche title. It never broke out big. It's not a big nostalgia hit, but everybody remembers that imagery, and that's the thing. So eventually she gets up, she does her thing, the dress comes off, and she is covered from her neck down in this white squiggly pattern.
And it's sort of the inverse of the chair design.
This was done on set. She actually brought him with her. This was painted by an artist named Keith Haring. So, Dave, what do you know about Keith Haring?
Everybody knows Keith Haring's art because you have seen it fucking everywhere. Keith Haring was in the late 70s into the 80s and late 80s, I guess. he is a gay artist, and kind of starting in the early 80s, he becomes a very kind of vocal AIDS activist. His art is, it's pop art, and I don't really know, like, he's sort of at the forefront of that pop art movement, like Basquiat.
Right. His style, like, everybody's seen it. Everybody has seen it.
It's very no wave, kind of like New York.
It looks very, very simple, but the power in it was almost like, he was almost like a cartoonist, where he was able to communicate very complex ideas through very simple, like duotone pictures. It wasn't a lot
and very subtle, because his success is due a lot to that subtlety, because his shit it is so commercial eventually. Like, you can find it on fucking everything. You can find it on Starbucks gift cards, skateboards, coffee mugs, t-shirts. Like, it's the Red Hot and Blue, I think, used some of it for their stuff. There's the Christmas,
the Run DMC,
a very something. Which one?
The one that the Run DMC Christmas song is from.
Yeah, it's something like this. It was a AIDS fundraiser.
Same
that.
Yeah, same Red Hot group did that one, I think.
Yeah, so it's
the Cole Porter Foundation,
yes.
I think is what it was.
And so you'll see it on a lot of that stuff. And he is, it was a lot of his shit was very political.
Yeah.
But it gets, a lot of it, I don't want to say it gets lost, because I think part of its power is in that he is not putting one over on people, but he's getting something through in a way that a lot of other people couldn't at the time, because a lot of AIDS activism, especially in New York, was very aggressive, and for very good reasons.
Well, yeah, it was, I think that was really sort of at the core of it, was he was able to deliver the message to a very broad audience at a time when it passed out of grids and became AIDS formally, and terrified the world in such a way that nobody would fucking talk about it. It didn't, the research towards cures or vaccines was just not getting through. And like, he was really one of the first voices to sort of, I don't know, I hesitate to say force it down people's throats, but he got it through in a way, like,
he was definitely not one of the first, but he was one of the ones that got across because it was more palatable.
That's probably, yeah. Because I think really the first place I ever saw him on was MTV was rotating his stuff, animations, a lot in the late 80s.
He died, I think, in 1990 from AIDS complications, but he did, right before he died, and I don't know if this was because his stuff was kind of commercial at that point, but he has one of the last things he did, it's called Once Upon a Time, and it's in the bathroom at, I don't know if it's still the Lesbian and Gay Community Center in New York. It was at the time. Yeah. And it's this giant mural in the bathroom, and it's in his style. It's the whole thing is this usual kind of black and white, kind of simple line drawing stuff, but it is extremely confrontational. It is a lot of like images of men having sex with men, or suggestions of men having sex with men. It's images of blood, or suggestions of blood. And there's a lot of implications in this thing. It's extremely powerful and very confrontational, which is why it is very cool, very moving, and it is massive.
Like a physically large piece.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because it's the Lesbian and Gay Center. It's the building is kind of like a YMCA, so it's a bathroom that is very, very large. It's a public bathroom.
Gotcha.
And so it's the whole wall. I think some of it goes onto the ceiling too.
Oh wow. Yeah.
But it is very cool.
Yeah.
And it is sort of like a last gasp, kind of like, this is what we are, and this is what you've done, kind of thing. Like, it's a very confrontational.
It's a last will and testament for the guy. So this design that he painted on her was not originally intended for this movie. This is actually the second time that it shows up. This was originally intended for a Grace Jones photo shoot by Robert Mapplethorpe.
Speaking of confrontational.
Yep. You got anything to say about him?
I know less about Robert Mapplethorpe than I do about Keith Haring. Most of what I know about Robert Mapplethorpe I learned from like all good things, I learned it from Patti Smith. There is a phenomenal book about Just Kids that is about her relationship with Robert Mapplethorpe. It is fantastic.
Yeah, I remember he had a big exhibit that was going to I think it was
It's called The Perfect Moment.
The one from the 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very late 80s.
Okay, because that was the one that they were going to do. I think it was at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, and I actually went to that just to see what it was because everybody was freaking out. So it was me and Christine at the time went to it and wasn't expecting that.
So I'll give you a little bit more if you want. The show is called The Perfect Moment. And the reason it's so famous, so Robert Mapplethorpe is a photographer starting in the late 70s. He moves to New York with Patti Smith, mostly because he's so inspired by Andy Warhol. And he kind of comes into his own right in the late 70s and into the 80s. He becomes not so much an activist at the time, at least. But he's very kind of no wave outsider photography, but he does find, because he's very talented, he kind of finds his way into galleries and becomes a big name. A lot of it is sort of portraiture stuff. There's some of his more famous stuff is like this flowers, a lot of up close shots, large scale stuff. However, there's another side to his art that is extremely graphically sexual. And so in the late 80s, it becomes a big controversy because there is the Corcoran Gallery in DC gets a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, which is a federal organization, and they want to do this Mapplethorpe show. I think he'd either just died or he was like right about to die. He also dies of AIDS, complications from AIDS. And so they do this show, and among it's not all sexual. Some of it's just the typical stuff. He put the whole thing together himself. And in this portfolio, there are some very, very graphic photos of like S&M, like gay S&M stuff.
Yep.
And like really aggressive gay S&M stuff.
Yeah.
Even outside of that, like there's photographs. I find a lot of his stuff really kind of, I don't like looking at it. It's very like, he has pictures of like him because he was, or like people who would cut themselves and stuff like that. I find that unnerving to look at. But it's some of that stuff. It's really hardcore stuff, and it becomes yet another fucking rallying cry for the Christian right, who kind of hone in on this very Bobert-esque way of getting in there, and it kind of blows up because the museum won't back down. They're basically like, no, you gave us money. This is art. You don't get to tell me what art is. And the Christian right is like, I don't want my money for this faggotry or whatever people like that say. And it becomes kind of a showdown. And eventually the museum kind of wins because they agree to take out some of the pictures, I think, but most of them remain up. And it kind of goes on,
right? Because the controversy in Boston when I went was the original exhibit with none of the omissions, and so this was also right around the same time as like the National Endowment for the Arts also gave money for that piece Piss Christ.
Andre Serrano.
Yeah. So like it was just this,
which is like far less artistic if you ask me. But
no, that seems like it was deliberately set up to be.
That is super antagonistic.
Yeah. Like in a way, I'm like, come on. But in another way, I'm like, yeah, I feel you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like, come on, man. Yeah. But I mean, Mapplethorpe stuff is always done in a very was a very talented person.
Yeah.
And this was kind of his way. Like this is, like Haring's Once Upon a Time. This is sort of one of his ways of being like, this is also my life.
Yeah.
This is also our lives. Like,
right. Because this exhibit comes to eventually sort of overshadow the larger body of his work, which is not this sort of aggressive in your face sort of sexuality. It's like you said, it's mostly just portraiture of city life.
But one of the reasons, and I know this is a big departure, but it's important, I think, to talk about it. One of the reasons why this type of work was important and still is very important is that, particularly now, when you look at things like, we have all these anti-trans legislation, anti-drag legislation, which is also, the root of all that is anti-women legislation, essentially.
Yeah.
But what you see is you have things like Drag Race, and I'm not going to get on a fucking soapbox about Drag Race right now. I could, and believe me, I want to, but I won't. But it's this very like it's that Haring thing of like here it's this very palatable, acceptable thing where everyone's like, oh my god, I love drag queens, I love gay people, blah 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 blah. And it's like, okay, you love gay people, but here's another part of gay culture. How do you feel about this part?
Right.
Or in Haring's case, it's like, okay, I know that you like Madonna and all this other stuff, but in the meantime, there are millions and millions of people, mostly men, who are dying right now, and you don't give a fuck about them.
Yeah.
And so his art is very important in that it's like, yes, you like these portraits, you like this pop art. Well, here's some more of my art. This is also my life. Look at this too, because I am a whole person. I'm a whole artist. This is me as an artist, especially someone who is about to die. I mean, literally about to die.
There's a tremendous power in that too. Like it really kind of puts like an exclamation point on the whole thing.
And so when we talk about activism in this way, it's like, was Mapplethorpe an activist? Not really, but this is sort of his way of saying, you want the Drag Race without the fisting pictures. You want, RuPaul without photographs, without Nan Golden's photographs of men dying.
Yeah.
This is his way of saying, we are whole people. We're not just a fucking show on television or something on a coffee mug. And so that's why these things are so important. And I think that was sort of his way of being, doing that kind of AIDS activism. And so getting back to all of that said, this all comes from his photographs of Grace Jones in this Haring design, in what I think is, and I don't really know anything about these photos. I've seen them many times, but I don't know much about them or where they come from. I think what he's doing in the photos is he's kind of playing with tribalism in a way, because she does have a lot of, the makeup is one thing. She's a very dark-skinned woman, and she has a lot of, I don't know, headdress is a way to describe it, but it's very ornate jewelry and like big like metal pieces that she's wearing in a lot of the photographs.
Right, and I think all of that is actually not all of it, but a number of those pieces appear in the movie. It's part of her costume because, like, once the getting back to the movie, once the costume.
Sorry to get real, y'all.
That's what we're here for, man. It's once the sort of the dress comes off and we see that pattern, the paint, the body paint, and also there's also she's wearing basically like a bikini that's like metal coils.
And she apparently showed up with, so they had to do a lot of ADR for her, even though she doesn't even speaking. It's all ADR for like noises that she makes, these kind of animalistic noises she makes. And apparently she showed up like in these fucking giant, jangly metal costumes, and they had to take them. She took them all off because it just kept being jangly in the ADR session.
Oh, no shit.
So finally she just took off everything she was wearing and did the whole thing nude.
Which sounds
fucking Grace Jones, man.
Totally on brand, because they, in the commentary, they fucking dance around it and they do not say anything, but they imply that she was very mercurial.
But like super into this movie.
Right. So like when she's there and she's on set and she's in the moment, she is fucking committed.
But it sounds like the when she's there part is the issue. That's
the variable. So she performs her striptease to a song called Vamp, which is also performed by her. It's a song that she's actually singing. And the song actually appears over the credits at the end also.
And her music is real hit or miss, but when she's on, it's pretty fucking cool.
It's mostly covers.
She's got a lot of fucking albums.
Right, but the stuff that she's mostly
Corporate Cannibal is a fantastic song.
Yeah. I can't remember if it was a Police song first or if Sting wrote it for her, but that song Demolition Man is fucking awesome. Yep. Also like all of this and all of the wardrobe in the movie that she appears in was her own wardrobe. And it was all stuff that she had modeled for designers, or it was stuff that designers had just like sewn for her to bring to it. Like it was not a budgeted like item for the movie like this, or stuff that was made for the movie. Like she just showed up with a fucking bag full of clothes and did that. And also apparently Andy Warhol was on set.
She would just show up with him.
Yeah.
And I think, no, this might be another moment to break and to dust off my queer theory, literary theory skills. To tell you why, one of the reasons I chose this movie, because again, this is not an explicitly gay movie.
Right.
But for me, I mean, and you know, what resonates with people is very subjective, obviously. But it will come as a shock to nobody that historically queer people are not really represented in film and television until relatively recently.
Right.
And when they do show up, or at least when they did show up, it was usually as a villain or as a victim, and it was to serve some kind of moralizing message, usually.
Yeah.
And as a result, this is kind of where this idea of like queer horror comes from. These are all postmodernist, you know, ways of looking at cultural texts. But because of that, queer people had to sort of find themselves in movies or in performances or project themselves into things, which for me, I think because of a lot of like internalized homophobia, that was very, very hard for me. And it's still very hard for me to do that. But what does resonate with me a lot and always has is this kind of vibe that you can look at a movie and say, or at least I can look at a movie and without these explicit queer narratives or queer characters, I can still look at it and say, gay people are responsible for this movie. So this Vamp would not be what it is. It may not have an explicit queer narrative, but it would not be what it is. It would not even exist at all, probably, without the influence of queer culture or the contribution of queer people. Because her being in this film is the result of gay men, basically.
Yeah, and it's the reason that you remember it. Like, you know,
it's the only reason to watch this fucking movie, because the performances are garbage for the most part.
Yeah.
Every now and then they really hit, but like they're not great. This is not a good movie by any stretch. It's a fun movie.
It's fun.
You watch it for her, and the reason you're watching her is because of her association with people like Robert Mapplethorpe and Keith Haring and Andy Warhol. Because of this character would not be what it is without them.
Yeah.
And so that is a vibe that I pick up on really heavily. And that's why I want to watch this movie. And it's why when it comes to like, what's a good queer horror movie? Well, I think of something like this because, you know, shit like Nightmare 2 does nothing for me because it's an incredibly homophobic movie.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just straight up hate.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, this is definitely a good pick because.
So that is my rant. That is my aside.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll get back. We said it. Her performance isn't terribly sexy. It's very animalistic,
and she's doing some like weird acrobatic shit. Because this chair, you've neglected to mention, this chair is kind of in the shape of a man.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's in the shape of a person with no head.
With no head.
But there are moments where she's like fucking the chair in a weird way, or like grinding on it in this weird way.
Yeah, she like climbs
but
up.
It is still not sexy at all.
No, it's sexual is what I would
It's violent and it conveys. Grace Jones is not an actor. Well, Grace Jones is not a good actor. But goddamn, does she sell it in this movie.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Like as we're gonna see in the next scene, like she fully commits to this role in ways that I don't think any other actress would have done. Tina Turner definitely would not have done that scene.
No, Tina Turner wouldn't have done any of this. And if she did, it would look silly.
Yeah, right.
It would be embarrassing I don't want to see Tina Turner do that.
No.
I have too much respect for her.
Nope. But
I have the same amount of respect for Grace Jones because she does it.
Yeah. So very much in the same way that us as the viewer are sort of like held in thrall as she performs this scene. They show the club and the club is like dead fucking silent. So like her performance comes to an end and the lights go down and the place is silent. And it's just like a number of shots of just guys with their like slack jaws at their table. And then eventually somebody starts to applaud and everybody does. And AJ decides that she's the one for some reason. She's the stripper that they're going to bring back to the frat.
Yeah. He needs a last minute exotic dancer for a party. He's going to go with the wild performance artist who said nothing and did not take any of her clothes off.
And terrified everybody.
Yes.
Yep. So he sort of like talks his way backstage, and he's brought back there. And this is like, we go backstage and we start to see the denizens of the club.
But on his way back, here is another important reason for why this movie was chosen, is on his way back, this whole time, Chris Makepeace, the Keith character, he's got Dee Dee Pfeiffer throwing herself at him, more or less.
And he is not interested.
He is not interested in her. He's not interested in the dancers. Do you know who he is watching? He is watching AJ walk. He's watching him go. And again, this is something that will probably resonate with queer viewers in the way that he's watching him. It is a very, it's what you would call a homosocial relationship that they have.
Yeah.
Which is kind of, I mean, it's just a way of saying male friendship, but it has certain connotations.
Sure.
But it's the way he's watching him is this very kind of longing looks. Like he doesn't want to be here. He's here because of his friend. Where he does want to be is with his friend, who he's now annoyedly watching go off upstairs. Who is, so AJ is excited. He's going off to meet this incredibly crazy dancer.
Yep.
Quote unquote. And he just looks upset that he is leaving, that he is going with this woman. He's got Dee Dee Pfeiffer, relentlessly hounding him. He's got Getty Watanabe fucking yucking it up.
Doing shtick.
Carrying the movement.
Yep.
And it's like that is recognizable to a lot of people in the way that's like, you see something in this character and you know it because you've done it. Now, every other audience member, straight audience members, won't recognize that, probably. So that's that element of like, you have to find yourself in these movies. That's where you find yourself, the way that he's looking at him.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah, because this is a pattern that we see throughout the movie. There's a scene that makes it very obvious coming up that I'm sure you've got notes on, and we'll get there.
It's also what makes the final scene in this movie feel so disingenuous.
I know.
Just unconvincing. Because surprise everybody, it has a romantic conclusion. Yeah. They jam down our throat.
I know. It's just like everything else, it doesn't land. It doesn't land. But as we go through the backstage area, it's occupied by some of the women that we've seen so far on the stage, and we pass by.
One of them's a bit of a stereotype.
Yeah. But there's one scene where it passes by a dressing room where two of the women are applying makeup to one another, and it doesn't immediately make sense until a little bit later on when AJ just straight up explains it. But they look like they're facing like it's like a makeup table, and they should be facing mirrors, right? But because they're vampires,
dumbass gimmick.
Yeah, I thought it was
dumbass vaudeville gimmick.
I thought it was really neat, just because it's just a weird touch, and there's kind of a spooky song playing as he's walking around in the back, and they're kind of like they're I don't know how to describe the way that they're moving, but it's very dreamy and kind of strange. It's almost like something out of a Jean Roland movie, but just like lacking all of the stuff that makes a Jean Roland movie that. But I thought it was cool. The reason that they're applying makeup to each other is because they don't have reflections. Neat scene, I thought. But AJ goes into Katrina's dressing room, and this is where he encounters her. He's there by himself, and she kind of sneaks up behind him, and she never speaks. But she has all these sort of like animal qualities to her that I really appreciate.
Actually, you know what? I'm going to take it back, because I said she's not a good actor, and I am rescinding that comment, because this scene is really good.
I think that in instances, in movies where she has dialogue, in where she's definitely being given direction, I think that she definitely she's going through the motions. Doesn't really.
Grace Jones is going to do what she wants to do.
Right.
If you try to make her do what you want her to do, you're going to get fucking bottom shelf Bond.
Yeah, like you get Mayday. But I think that in this movie, and they don't say it in the commentary or anything, but I think in this movie, she was not really given a lot of direction. They were just like action. And when she's just allowed to do what she wants to do, it comes off way different than the rest of the cast, who are like reading a script and trying to sort of like figure out where they're coming from and shit. All she has to do is whatever comes to mind, and it fucking works, because her whole thing
she is like, I am an animal.
Yeah, and she behaves that way.
But it reads on screen, so she starts to like take off his clothes or whatever. And,
Yep.
She's what he I think interprets as coming on to him and like initiating sex. But what it feels like if you're watching her, what it feels like is that she's doing what like just imitating what a person would do in that situation.
Yeah.
But if it's like if an alien came down to Earth now and was to imitate it, it's like going through the motions in this weirdly animalistic way because she is very hungry for something,
yep.
Unintended. But she's doing like, I'm supposed to do it this way to get what I want. And it reads really well.
She is licking his entire body. Like once the clothes come off, like, and again, like I think that other actors would be very self-conscious in this scene. Not Grace Jones. She is all over him until she gets up to about his up to his neck, the typical location for a vampire. And then all of a sudden her eyes roll back. She's got these like long fucking fingernails, these long toenails, which kind of freaks me out.
And I will tell you, this does not look good on the Blu-ray.
No. I'm sure that on a lower resolution format, like this was probably passable as just low budget special effects. In the glory of 1080, not so much. It looks a little wooden, definitely very plastic, but
it reads like a cheap American Werewolf in London.
Yeah, because like her face sort of changes, their appearance changes. This is the thing, like this is when we start to really sort of address the movie's vampire situation. This is the kind of vampire movie that I wish there were more of. Like after really into the 90s, like when I was a kid, I liked the tragic romantic vampire thing, the Anne Rice thing, but after a time I just phased out of it. And what I really, really like as a horror movie fan now are the ones where they are this predatory creature that needs to be destroyed. Like I like them way more as a monster, as a threat, as an antagonist than this sort of sympathetic thing. Like I save all of that shit for Frankenstein. This movie and like Near Dark came out with like in a year of each other, and they really present the sort of vampire, although in vastly different context. But that's really the vampire I like, is they're there to get staked and like to drink blood and be a threat. I wish there were more movies like this. It does the thing that I don't particularly care for in vampire movies, where when they go into vamp mode, their appearance changes. I really kind of like to keep it simple. It's just a personal thing.
Yeah, all or nothing. Come on.
Yeah. But
it's like Salem's Lot. Just be the big blue wild creature.
Yeah, like that. That fucking makeup design is so awesome. I give that one a pass. But like Buffy the Vampire Slayer did that a lot, where like the vampires could pass among you until they were vampires, and then all of a sudden they were very monstrous looking.
Well, because they had to be sexy creatures.
Yeah. Like so many movies do that. I don't particularly care for that. The Lost Boys does it. I give it a pass just because I like that movie quite a bit, and it's not quite as intense as here or stuff that comes in the future. But my favorite sort of vampires are like Lance Henriksen and that whole crew. Like they just got fangs. They're fucking gnarly and nasty and mean and bad. Just keep it simple. That's all you got to do. But Katrina changes into like a creature in this one, and then as the movie goes on, most of the vampires also eventually do that.
I mean it's From Dusk Till Dawn. This movie is From Dusk Till Dawn.
From Dusk Till Dawn is really this movie.
Yes.
But yeah, so she doesn't just bite his neck with the fangs. She like tears a humongous chunk out of his neck, and
apparently she really hurt him.
Apparently the fang appliance that she's wearing, because it's not just fangs with her, it's like a shitload of like jagged, snarly teeth. It passed through she really bit him, and it passed through the appliance on his neck and like bit his real neck.
Hey.
But she is
do what you got to do to be famous, man.
She is going house on that wound, and and so he dies. And then
she laughs.
Yep, she laughs.
She laughs in the most magnificent way.
Sinister Grace Jones laugh. After a time, Keith decides that he's been out there with Duncan by himself the whole time. He decides that he has to go backstage and find AJ. because it's taken too long. And before he gets there, he sees some of the club's machinery in action. He's in a restroom at one point, and he sees Vlad.
This scene just makes no sense.
No sense. Why is his shirt off? Why is Vlad?
Yeah, why is this dude in the bathroom without a shirt on?
I have no idea. No idea.
If only to set up a comment that comes later.
There's a bunch, because there's a bunch of wobbly scenes that are setups for other things that don't fucking make any sense. This is one of them. So Vlad is one of the ghouls. Maybe he's a vampire. It's really unclear where Vic and Vlad fall.
I think Vlad is supposed to. So Vlad's like the bouncer, I guess.
Yeah.
I think he's supposed to be kind of a Renfield.
Right.
In the same way that Vic is supposed to be. I mean, Vic is very clearly a Renfield.
Yeah, because he's eating bugs. But
I mean, he's not a cool Renfield like
Dwight Fry.
Dwight Fry is a cool Renfield, but he's still Renfield.
He's Renfield. He's changing his shirt for some reason, and the reason is just so that we can see his body where he's got all these little scars all over him.
But they don't even look like teeth marks. They just look like puncture wounds in like a weird pattern.
Yep. We cut outside of this to Vic, who's now chastising a waitress for serving cocktails without the little umbrellas, which makes them classy, which is something that which is a gag he hits a bunch of times. He wants everything to be classy.
And he's a stereotype in this other, like he's a real schlocky, we got to go to Vegas.
Right.
And I'll tell you what, I think this actor is deserving of and capable of quite a bit more than this, as he demonstrates later.
Yeah. Yeah, he has a monologue a little later on that's pretty good.
That's really good.
Yep. But but he does that. He does the Italian fingers thing when he says classy. Like every time he does it. Yeah. Because you gotta the finger thing.
He's got to have a pasta primavera in front of him all the time.
Yeah. And I mean and they even play like a Louis Prima song later.
Yeah, I mean, goddamn.
Yep. But this is where we
better Vamp. Come on.
Yeah. So he's Keith is unable to get out back. He tries to talk to the girl that AJ talked to, who did bring him out, but she plays stupid, and so
she plays Asian stereotype. Is what she plays, in a pretty offensive way.
She's picking up the slack for getting.
Yeah, they were like, "Well, we're not going to do it with Duncan, but we got to get it in there somewhere. It's the '80s, man."
Yep. So Amaretto,
sexy girlfriend.
Oh no!
You can cut it out if you want to, but
no, it's staying in. We got to commit to our sins. Amaretto takes Keith out back. We find out that one of the hostesses has alerted Katrina to the problem from before, that AJ wasn't alone and that there's others, and now they got a problem on their hands they got to deal with. They got to kill all three of them.
But first, Amaretto. Is that really her name, Amaretto?
No, that's just her stripper name.
Okay.
Yeah, because she actually says that at the very beginning when she goes over, she introduces herself. She says, "Hi, I'm Amaretto, not my real name," because the whole thing is like what her real name is. Because her real name is Allison.
Right. Because she has to go with the wigs now. She has to go pick up some wigs.
Right. Yeah. Okay. But
I think they were just like, there's just too much time spent in this strip club. They were like, we gotta change the scenery here a little bit.
Right. And it's like that after hours thing where like a good deal of after hours takes place in one location until it suddenly doesn't. They got to get them back out on the streets where shit's going crazy. So she says like, go out back, wait for me, and we'll go over to the hotel, because one of the strippers tells her that like he left with the stripper named Candy. And she's at some hotel or something like that. This whole part's a little muddy, but they'll walk over there and they'll find him. They'll find him and they'll leave. So they go looking for him. Keith has to wait out back of the club for her. He sees Vlad taking out bodies. And this is where you see like really that big like leitmotif that runs throughout in terms of like the art direction is there's like parts of the city, layers of the city in the background are lit up very brightly in like pink and green hues, which comes back. It's a big part of the movie's design.
So apparently the reason for that is that the DP had said, like Richard Wenk, I think is the guy's the director, right?
That's the director, yeah.
He said that the most important thing the DP ever said to him was, he was like, bright white light at night looks like shit. And so, because they were like, we can't light it. We have to light it somewhere, because they had no money either.
Yeah.
They were like, we have to do something to offset the fact that we can't light it like it's night, like with white light, essentially. We have to come up with something else. And they were like, I have an idea. we're going to light it like an early 90s porno, apparently. And so that's why it looks like it's got the pink and green and all that.
Yeah.
It's like I have to give it a fantasy look in order to make it look okay.
It looks like pages out of like a Sharper Image catalog or something like that. It's very 80s, but it also really smacks of like Mario Bava. Like it has that like where the lights aren't as much a part of the scene as the characters. It's cool.
Or it has like a real heavy kind of French film, like 60s, 70s French film vibe.
Yeah. Yep.
Like these are hard colors,
Yep.
but they work.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, they keep showing up throughout it. It's a nice way to sort of like contrast, gives the movie a little bit of character. So Keith and Amaretto walk out towards the hotel. Then there's more banter about why she strips, even though Keith doesn't ask. But
and we actually get to see her strip later, and it is fucking hilarious.
It's pretty fun. It's pretty funny. They encounter a horror movie little girl sitting out on the steps of a rundown apartment building way too late at night. And then for some reason, the milkman leaves the building in the middle of the night.
So again, this is that fantasy, this is sort of like what is the uncanniness of it all. Like, this is the bad part of town. Even the milkman is delivering at night. Yep. Something's not right.
Yeah. Back at the club, the girl who brought AJ to Katrina is punished for messing up by having her heart ripped out. And then we cut back to Keith and Amaretto, who arrive at the hotel. They're sort of
arrive at the hotel from Maniac.
Basically, it's a really weird, like, there is a season of American Horror Story that takes place. I think it's just called Hotel.
That is the only season of that show I've ever made it through.
The one with Lady Gaga?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I fucking hate that show.
I don't particularly care for it either. I really liked that one. It reminds me of the hotel from that season.
Well, so but this is that fantasy element again, where they're in the elevator going up to wherever they're going.
And he's like an extra from a Coen Brothers movie. Yeah.
He is this fucking weird, again, that uncanny valley thing. But he's also in the elevator. The music that's playing is like the theme song from Donna Reed.
Yeah. Yeah. And it even chases Keith out into the hall. Because what ends up happening is they ride the elevator up. And it's just this weird old man in a very obvious toupee. And at one point, the doors open. Keith gets out, but it's the wrong floor. And Amaretto gets back into the elevator. The doors close before he can get back on. So he's sort of trapped on this floor. And that music continues to play as he sort of like walks down the hall. There's like people screaming at each other through the doors and stuff like that. But he goes back, he turns, and he finds that the elevator is back on his floor. The door is like open. So he gets into it about halfway. And we're jammed into a scene where, like, you've seen it a million times, where there's these old elevators where the door closes on you halfway and then the elevator starts to go up. And he's almost like, he's going to get cut in half, but he like jams its progress with a fire extinguisher and sort of gets out and then manages.
It's a real Die Hard moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And then he finds his way back down to the street, runs out of the hotel in a panic.
So this is where the movie really starts to drag a little bit.
It sags. It feels a little filler.
And mostly just because it's like, got to get him out of the club, got to do something.
Yeah. We cut out of that. We go back to the club. Vic and Vlad are in the office now, where Vic complains about wanting to go to Vegas, where clubs are a big deal and they're classy. It's the whole running gag thing. We cut back where Amaretto and Keith reunite on the street. She runs out on him again because she's mad about the way that he sort of perceives this thing in the past. Like, he does not have any memory of who she is, and she's mad about it now. So she stops.
There's like a real heavy implication that he should know her.
Yeah.
But that's never very clearly stated.
No. And in the end, it's like, how the fuck is he supposed to remember this thing that happened
also,
to him?
who gives a shit?
I know. So she runs out on him. Back at the club, Duncan is doing his shtick.
This is where we get that that hot Concrete Blonde song.
Yeah. Yeah. Song.
If anyone's interested, the song is called Kim. It is from their first album. It is awesome.
Yeah. And this is the second time that we see him struggle with Banaka spray. Running joke, legitimately funny. He's super, super drunk. And he approaches one of the waitress and he asks her, "Hey baby, what time do you get off?" And she tells him and he says, "Can I watch?" There's some laughter.
Yeah, like, it is the fact that they were able to get this out without everybody laughing is pretty amazing. And it reads that like you're supposed to think like this is a goofy moment. This is not him being gross and sad. I mean, it is, but it's like it's played for laughs in a way that actually is funny.
Yeah. And it's funny.
Because Kenny Watanabe, it should be said, does not read as straight in this movie at all. I mean, I don't think he actually is in real life either.
He
does not read that way in this.
Yeah, I don't really get. I don't think he really ever does. Like I remember he was on that VH1 thing they did. I love the '80s, and just like hearing him talk as just like himself, he does kind of come across as a little bit gay. But then again, so did Radish in Final Exam, and he's like a hetero dude. So
you say.
So I say. I mean, who fucking knows? But yeah, I don't want to draw any conclusions about this guy. But yeah, like he definitely, this character in particular definitely comes across as a little gay. Keith
just a little bit.
Though. No, just a little twist. Keith encounters the albino gang again. They chase him around the frightening streets in their old school hearse. They drive him down into the sewers or these drainage tunnels underneath the streets.
I say the albino gang is a pretty boring gang.
They are. That's in terms of like, I mean, especially with the precedent set like the Warriors, like being a bunch of albinos. Yeah. I mean, come on, put some top hats on or some clown makeup or something.
You could put on some overalls and some fucking roller skates.
Roller skates. Those guys had it nailed down. They still could fight in those roller skates.
Yeah. If you can't top the Moon Runners, then what are you doing? What are you doing here?
Yep. Or the Van Cortlandt Rangers.
Van Cortlandt Rangers.
Nobody's wasting nobody. So now Keith is under the streets in these drainage tunnels, and he at one point every now and then like he's about to try to get out, and like an arm
fucking leftover scenes from Chud.
Yeah, he watches through a drain as one of the gangbangers encounters the little girl from before. This is definitely like a gold star moment for the movie. Like I definitely love this scene. For some reason, when we see her, she's like marching around the street. And the guy, one of them, it's not Snowflake. It's not Drago's character. It's like one of the guys.
It's the one who looks like him.
But like he's like a big wrestler version of him. And he like grabs the girl by the arm, and she ends up like attaching herself to his wrist by her teeth because she's a vampire. And he's like flailing around and like whipping her all over the place, trying to get rid of her.
In this hilarious way that her body position never changes.
Now, I thought this was a dummy or something, but as it turns out, that was a real person.
No, it's clearly a person, because you can tell like she keeps the position right. It's like clearly a person. Yeah, it has weight.
The way that she's positioned, it's like she's sitting in a chair but without the chair. It must have been very hard to hold that position. It's super fucking funny.
So yeah, weird little girl, you're the star of the fucking show.
Keith returns to the service. He has to outrun the gang. He shoots down an alley, jumps into a dumpster, and he manages to give the gang the slip, but he finds AJ's dead body in the process. He jumps out of it. Yep. Mystery solved. He runs out. He finds a phone booth. He calls the cops. So the cops are coming. AJ's body, also the Asian girl who got her heart ripped out, she was in the dumpster as well. They've been found, so Katrina and Vic have to do something about it. Since she doesn't speak, it's really hard to figure out what she's indicating here, but Vic seems to understand. He tells Vlad to bring the bodies back in, and then Katrina like cuts her wrist and like feeds him her blood.
Which is another, like, you're just kind of like, do you feel like you had to put this in here, I guess?
It feels like it had a purpose. Like, I didn't really understand.
Apparently they didn't have to cut anything out of this movie.
Oh.
Like, they were on schedule, on budget the whole time. They never cut anything. So it's like, all these kind of exposition-y moments are just sort of there for no reason.
Yeah. Keith shoots into the restroom inside the club. Somebody tries to get in, and he eventually opens up the door, and it's AJ, who's been resurrected as a vampire.
And hey, everybody, have you seen American Werewolf in London? Because you're about to see the knockoff version.
Yeah, this part really, this is one of the sort of like, they go out of their way to explain a lot in this movie, except this one sort of vital part about how this whole like resurrection things work. Because a moment ago, AJ was stone cold dead. He was just fucking dead. He wasn't undead. He was just dead. And now they did something to him to make him undead, but they never explain what that is. They don't have to, I suppose, But it would have been fucking helpful, because I'm sitting here 2 viewings of this movie in going, like, how the fuck does this work? Like, what are they doing here? But he's fine. And the cops show up and they essentially talk them off. But while this is happening, like, AJ is like fully vamped out. Like, he's into whatever that lifestyle is, or unlifestyle, because he's like sucking on one of the stripper vampires' fingers, and he's like really...
And he is looking full Jerry Dandridge. This makeup is 100% frightening.
Yeah. They get rid of the cops, who are sent off for like they're about to close up. You know, it's last call. They're gonna watch the last show. Like, it's supposed to be funny. I think.
Oh, we skipped over the part where Dee Dee Pfeiffer is dancing on the stage.
Oh,
in like full pantsuit. No.
Yeah, she's wearing like a tube top and like form-fitting pants. And in the process of this strip tease, neither of those things come off. Nope.
There is neither strip nor tease. She is basically the girl standing by the jukebox at the arcade in 1986 at the Fox Run Mall, just shaking it until the Def Leppard song is over.
Yeah, right, because there's not a lot of dancing. She shakes her hips. She does a sort of like pointing at the dudes in the audience. And then we cut away. Yeah, I don't know. It's, again, not a lot of nudity in this strip club.
No. God bless them. I love it.
Yeah, they're breaking the mold. They're doing their own thing. So now Keith learns that everybody's a vampire. He's just in this.
Except maybe Vic and Vlad. Maybe. We don't really know.
We really have no idea. The stripper vampire attacks him, and she turns into like another like vamped out like makeup vampire. And
it does have a very Buffy the Vampire Slayer feel. Like the makeup has that look to it. Like
right.
It's kind of like sexy Nosferatu.
Yeah. She attacks him. She sort of like handles both of them very readily. But he reaches out and he kills her with a stiletto heel.
Comeuppance.
Yep. And it's irony. But now AJ is in full vampire mode. He's got the the eyes and the fangs and stuff, and he's explaining, I gotta feed, I gotta kill you, Keith. And they have this exchange where Keith essentially offers himself to AJ as food.
Weird, huh?
Yep.
I mean, what with the way he's been looking at him all night?
Yep. He it's a big bromance moment.
And by bromance you mean homosexual romance.
Yep. I
mean, this moment. I think what they're going for is the sort of more dramatic moments of American Werewolf.
Yeah.
But it comes across as gay melodrama.
Yeah. Yeah,
definitely. And he even says "I love you" in it.
Yeah, there's no other way really to read it. I think I almost feel like the way that the movie ends is almost like the people making the movie were kind of aware of this and were like, well, shit, we can't make this a gay movie because it's 1986. So they really step on that deliberately, because I don't know how else you're supposed to really read this scene. It's.
Well, I got a secret for everybody who made this movie. You already made a gay movie when you put Grace Jones in it.
Yep. So eventually he's like, you got to kill me. And so Keith is going to stake him with like this, basically a big piece of broken wood, but he can't do it. So AJ kind of does it for him, where he positions the board in such a way that when he goes to attack Keith, he ends up kind of running himself through. And as he's dying, he's like, oh, and don't forget, you can burn him with sunlight, and fire's good too, and I think you figured out the other one. And then he's like, like he dies.
Which is kind of a fun moment.
Yeah. Because it really is like he's about to die, and then he's like, but wait, and almost holds up a finger. Like he even throws him the keys to the
I thought he was gonna like pull out a list of like, here's some other stuff you should know.
By
buddy.
the way, running water, if you throw stuff on the floor, they gotta count it.
Also my grocery list. Gotta go.
Zeppelin rules. It's now last call out in the bar, and Keith is stuck in the club. And the club is now ready to sort of close the gap. They've got this problem that they need to address. They've got to kill him. And at one point, Keith yells, he's like panicking. He yells out to the club, "You gotta help me! Somebody call the cops! These people are vampires." To which somebody in the club replies, "That doesn't make them bad people." And somebody else yells, "Eat shit and howl at the moon."
This is where you get that real snappy kind of Richard Wenk dialogue.
Yeah,
and so Dracula bites the Big Apple humor.
That's right. So this is the scene where Vic does the big like villain monologue, and it's.
And I'll tell you, man, it is not right for this movie. It feels weird, but it is pretty fucking good.
It's a good bad guy like monologue, like, and they're going in like right as we're turning into the third act. He's like, "We provide a vital service to the community. We take out the trash."
So this comes back to that idea of like, this is the bad part of town. Like, this is why the location matters in this movie.
Yeah.
And it's also like it feels like they're trying to offer some social critique and they don't.
Yeah.
Like, they just really miss the mark, which is kind of a shame because like you're coming at a time that's like you've got the ramp up of the AIDS crisis. You've got the crack epidemic is coming. Like, you've got all this stuff about like marginalization, the deinstitutional, the Reagan shit. Like, it's all kind of coming undone. You have a real moment to really do a social critique, and he doesn't.
Nope.
It just so happens that he delivers it really fucking well.
Yeah. Yeah. But what he explains to Keith, I'm really sorry. You got to die. This was a whole accident. This is how it usually works. We get guys who come in here off the street, the dregs, the lowest of the low in society, and they sort of drag themselves in here, and they disappear, and nobody misses them. Which is something that we find in a lot of like true crime stories of the period, where it's just like, these are people who will not be missed.
Meanwhile, you have the women behind the bar serving the drinks with those goddamn wigs.
Yep.
Holy shit.
Crazy wig. It's like
these are like reject Dolly Parton wigs.
They look like that, or Tracy Turnblad from from Hairspray. It's that big like bouffant.
They just took them and like placed them on their head. They're not hiding anything.
Yeah. So Keith does a thing where he's like, "Hey, how about like a last request?" They do it in Vegas, to which Vic is like, "What? They do?" Like, yeah, all right, fine.
Way to ruin the moment.
Yeah, but
filmmaker.
He's like, "Give me like a last drink before I die." So he orders brandy, 3 glasses, make it a triple, leave the bottle. And he starts to very conspicuously walk all over the place, just spilling brandy everywhere. And then he sets the place on fire, basically. Like, the brandy is very flammable, and so this gives him the means to sort of like distract the vampires, give them a means to escape. With Amaretto and Duncan, they go down into like a basement, and they go out through like one of those like garbage hatches with the elevator that kind of emerges onto the street. And then as this is happening, Vic and Vlad celebrate one last toast, and they died by fire. So it seems. And then the 3 survivors beat it back to Duncan's car. But they're like T-boned by the like tow truck that we saw earlier. And they try to escape him by like driving
the
up
garbage truck.
The
garbage truck's the other truck.
Yeah, so then they get trapped between the garbage truck and the tow truck, which play this like game of chicken with them in the longest, improbably long game of chicken, where
something tells me this movie wasn't quite at 90 minutes.
Yeah, because the scene goes on almost as long as that like spin out part from beginning, where what they're really watching is a guy do like a 9-point turn to sort of like get out of a really small parking spot. And as soon as he does, they floor it and get out back onto the street, just in time for the tow truck and the garbage truck to collide.
And then,
as they're driving away,
then it happens.
And this is the other part that fucking bothers me.
Man, this is like when Radish dies in everyone's favorite movie, Final Exam.
Yeah. Duncan is a vampire now, somehow.
Apparently he hated this moment. He said that this was the reason why he wanted to do the movie.
Yeah.
Because he thought it sounded really cool, but when he saw himself as a vampire, it like upset him.
He looks very strange.
Because he's one of the only ones that doesn't look kind of goofy. He looks kind of creepy.
Yeah. Yeah, because he's not really alert. It's like this is coming over him. At no point is it ever. I mean, I suppose that there's plenty of times where he could have been bitten, but like since we don't know how the vampire transformation happens, it just comes on suddenly. He gives no indication that he's been bitten, that he's had any sort of like contact with the stripper vampires, but all of a sudden he's just a vampire in the back seat.
I'm guessing they just didn't know how to resolve that part of the story. They were like, he's a vampire.
It must have been.
Blow him up in the car.
It drives me crazy because so they drive it over some spikes, going into a parking lot the wrong way, and they crash, and then the car blows up with him in it. And as they're running away, he goes, "Guys!" And then the thing blows up, and then you see his body like burning on the outside of the car, and he goes, "Guys!"
That's a fucking shame.
Yeah.
He should have been the one with Dee Dee Pfeiffer.
Yep. Just two tight bros, and she doesn't have to pretend to be his friend.
Yeah.
Yep. But Amaretto and Keith break into a pawn shop at this point, and we get the payoff to Chekhov's bow and arrow.
There it is.
Yep. And Amaretto also picks up a horror movie flashlight that's probably going to die later on during an important scene.
Well, don't worry. She'll bang it a couple times, and it'll come back on.
Yep.
That's how flashlights work.
Yep, they kill a vampire in there just to sort of demonstrate that Keith knows how to use the arrow. It's the garbage truck driver, and that's also at this point where he's doubting her humanity, like she might be a vampire too.
Yeah, this is where the name and "you don't know who I am" bullshit comes back. And it's like, I don't fucking care at this point. I feel like this movie I feel like I have been talking for 9 hours right now.
Yeah, I know.
I also feel like I've been talking about this movie for 10 years.
No shit. This is so far. This is our longest episode by far. And I honestly,
we have been talking longer than this movie actually is.
Yep. So they see a bus and they run over to it and they open it up and the bus driver's got fangs, which really makes me wonder why the undead need to have all these blue collar jobs.
It does have a sort of like Salem's Lot quality to it, where it's like, well, what happens when everyone's a vampire? I don't know. Town just kind of keeps going, I guess.
Yeah. But they find themselves.
It also has a very like, you remember that Twilight Zone episode, like the "Going My Way"?
Oh yeah,
Hitchhiker.
Yeah. They find themselves surrounded by vampires on the street, and they're saved when the albino gang shows up once again.
And now this is where I got confused, because I had thought this entire movie, and I have seen this movie several times. I thought the whole time that the albino gang are vampires. I don't think they are.
They don't, and that's the thing that really kind of gets me, is because it is strongly suggested throughout the movie that everybody who occupies this part of town,
I think she just has shitty teeth.
Yeah, it's just she's just got jacked up teeth.
So they tricked us.
They tricked you. I mean, when they're introduced, I think we're supposed to think that they're vampires. But now it's revealed that they're not, because they're like, he looks at him, Billy Drago looks at him and he goes, "What gang is this?" Which this streetwise gang of toughs are like the only people in this part of town who don't seem to realize that vampires are fucking everywhere.
Yeah.
And so once again, the little girl vampire like literally flies at him and we cut away. But it gives Keith and Amaretto enough time to run away. They go down into the sewers. But as they're about to go, this is when she decides that the best time to sort of explain to him what her name is when they're being chased by a horde of the undead. And so there's this like moment where they have a story beat where she's like, "My name is Allison such and such. It was at a fifth grade summer break. We were at a party. We were playing Spin the Bottle. And I was supposed to kiss Moose, but you nudged the bottle to you and I had to kiss you." And so that's it. That's the whole payoff of the "why don't you know who I am" thing that has been dogging us this entire movie. That's the payoff.
I hate it.
I hate it too. They go down into the sewers. I also hate this part. They go down into the sewers. The flashlight dies.
Yeah, but this part has a truly incredible moment in it.
They find basically a secret hatch into like a mausoleum where all of the vampire coffins are. And while they're
again,
in there,
I swear to God, this is just, they ripped all of this off from Chud.
So they accidentally knock over a barrel that's full of some fluid.
But you know, if you were a vampire, the best thing you could do is keep something flammable right next to your bed.
Oh yeah, and perhaps the most flammable thing. And
Take a tip from The Burning: don't keep flammable liquids around your bed when everything is lit by candlelight.
Oh yeah, and certainly not like $100 worth of like fuel, of gasoline. It turns out that this vampire lair is also where they're storing all of their gas for some reason. There are barrels of it, just barrels of it everywhere, and so they hide.
That's Reagan's 80s for you, man.
I know, man. That fuel crisis. They hide out. They watch the vampires get in, but then the flashlight comes back on, and it spooks Dee or Amaretto, who knocks over, and they knock over the gas, and then they knock over more gas. They run out of there, and then they light it on fire, and all of the vampires down there die. But now the two of them are separated, and Keith kind of walks a little ways, and he finds Amaretto now in the clutches of Katrina in this like final standoff, where he draws the bow and arrow, and at one point he sort of looks up and he sees the sun kind of breaking through some boards in the ceiling, and so
which implies that the sewer, which is underground, under the road, everybody, that sewer is just covered by boards.
Like 2x4s, yeah.
So that means that the road above them is 2x4s.
Yep. His blood he's holding
the old-timey part of Los Angeles.
Yep, they haven't come up to code yet. He's holding the bow, ready to throw the arrow, and like his blood, like the blood from the, you know, basically from holding it, drips down, distracts Katrina, who he shoots in the mouth, and he pins her to the wall. And then Amaretto runs her through with a pipe, commando style. But Katrina gets loose, does some horror movie laughing, and then Keith knocks those boards aside and essentially like pins her between two beams of sunlight before he like knocks the last one out, and she gets exposed to the light and gets burned up. And just before they walk away, her skeletal hand reaches up and gives them the finger, which is not.
Now, please tell me you watched this scene closely.
I watched it.
All right, go back and watch it again. You can clearly see someone's hand in the shot manipulating the arm.
Oh, well,
like you can see a full person's hand.
Well, now I have
manipulating that skeleton.
Because I definitely didn't, but I was like looking for like cables and shit because it's very mechanical. It's very corny.
It is in the shot. You can see someone moving it with their hand.
Oh no.
It's fantastic.
I did notice.
I feel like they made it to the end of the movie and they were like, fuck it, we don't have any more time. Just do it.
It's like in the scene where the little girl leaps at Snowflake, right before they cut away, you can see the harness that she's wearing.
Yeah.
But yeah, this also, I just want to say, this does not feel like a thing that Grace Jones would do.
Yeah.
No, but it's the 80s, so I'm going to let it slide.
This is the equivalent of Jason coming out of the pond.
Yeah, so they're about to climb back to the surface. He still doesn't trust her, so he puts her in the sunlight, and turns out she's okay. Just about...
This is when he kisses her hand romantically.
Yes, she's like, thanks. Just about about to climb out, Amaretto is pulled back down by Vlad, who's pissed off that they killed Katrina, but before he could do anything about it, he's run through by a stake from behind, and it's revealed that AJ is still undead. And it turns out...
God, this ending is exhausting.
It is. It turns out that the board he staked himself with was like Formica and not wood. Banter ensues. I can go to night school, I can get a job on the graveyard shift. And then this is when Keith kisses Amaretto as a rainbow crosses the sky. And
it is like this is the most aromantic kiss I have ever seen.
Really, they don't have...
He spends this entire movie avoiding this woman.
All of his chemistry is with Robert Rusler, none with her whatsoever.
Yeah, like he is clearly not interested in her. And then all of a sudden we're supposed to believe at the end that, oh, guess what, everybody? He really is into her.
Yeah, he calls her Hun.
Don't worry, everybody, I guess.
He calls her Hun at one point in a way that just does not click. But yeah, that rainbow is the last of the sort of Wizard of Oz references. Also, Pride. So
there you go.
Roll credits. Over Volare again, but it eventually fades into Vamp by Grace Jones.
Look, they paid a lot of fucking money for Volare.
They did, actually. In the commentary, they note that it cost $35,000 to get that song. The studio didn't want to pay for it, and so the producer paid for it out of his pocket because they just needed to have it for some reason.
That Concrete Blonde song? $10. They just bought the record.
Yeah. Yep. I wonder how that works though. Like, I mean, I would imagine that the studio or at least the label was like, we want to promote all these bands. So like,
I imagine there's a deal with the label where they're like, we will give you this lot of music, these 10 artists.
Yeah.
You put them in your movie.
Yeah. But yep, that's it. Roll credits.
Holy crap.
That's Vamp. It is an exhausting movie that definitely has its strong points, definitely has its weak points.
It has the most unrealistic, unbelievable romantic ending.
Yep. But gay as hell.
Yeah.
Yep. So there it is. There it is. It's a movie that I seem to remember. It's like a lot of these ones that we've done so much that I haven't seen in a long time that I remember enjoying quite a bit. And like watching this, like it's a perfectly adequate movie. I don't regret seeing it. I watched it twice and I enjoy it, but I don't think it's one that I will find myself going back to. I think it's one that in the context of this series, it's definitely worth seeing. It's a movie that I think that you adequately pointed out is definitely fits into the queer horror milieu, but it's not one of the ones that is I see mentioned in those terms, you know, like it's something that's happening a lot. Like Shudder has a whole section of like queer horror, but it's not featured in that sort of group. And I really think that it definitely belongs there.
That's right.
Yep. So what are we doing next? What are we closing out our Pride series with?
Next is Return of the Living Dead. Ooh. And you're saying, wait, that's not a queer movie. And I'm saying, oh, isn't it? You're going to have to tune in to find out, motherfucker.
Yep. So be back here in 2 weeks when we do Return of the Living Dead.